Hey guys, Zane here with another one take review, and today I wanted to talk about the Art Bears album, The World as It Is Today. The World as It Is Today is the third studio album from rock in opposition band Art Bears, as well as their final studio album for literal decades until their reunion in the early 2000s. But seeing as this record came out in 1981, it took them a while to get around to a fourth effort. While not as accessible, if the entire rock in opposition movement can even be accessible, the whole point of it was kind of to not be. As their slightly more well-known peers Henry Cow, this group, Art Bears, are just such an odd project, and the fact that they were around for such a relatively short period of time, it's kind of impressive that they delivered on their third studio album a semi-magnum opus of sorts, The World as It Is Today. Now, rock in opposition as a musical style is a style that prides itself on being extremely abstract while still very self-collected and well-composed. The entire movement's dislike for the music industry and the sort of traditionalism that somewhat plagued it during the late 70s and extremely early 80s was definitely something that resulted in a style that was equally as strange and out there as it was slightly rooted in certain influences within the realm of progressive rock music, which you could argue was the sort of, again, older rebellion of traditionalism in comparison to this sort of avant-garde style of it. This mixture of experimentalism and progressive rock with a sort of theatricality about it all is ultimately what defined records like The World as It Is Today. Everything here feels like it's on the brink of collapsing, but at the same time, it's very apparent that Art Bears have everything held together in terms of their actual performance and what they want to achieve with said performance, if only by a very thin thread. The World as It Is Today has all of the sophistication and compositional class as a Vivaldi piece, and all of the strange quirkiness and abstract aspects of your uncle's favorite Frank Zappa record, though then again, depending on who you ask, the two really aren't all that different, so hey. Dagar Kraus is an intense vocalist who is perfect for fronting Art Bears as a collective, as their very strange, meticulous kind of style is beautifully suited by her voice. While Krause's voice is seemingly normal at first, she eventually goes into a performance style that could definitely be compared to something proto-Bjork or even proto-future Kate Bush from this point moving forward in 1981. Choosing the path of a show tune-esque vocal delivery style on the second half of the album with tracks like Law is definitely unexpected, but still is a fitting, poignant match with the unforgiving atmosphere of the majority of the album. Meanwhile, her shrieks and sort of banshee-like delivery on the track Freedom is something that is not only definitive for Art Bears as a project, but arguably even the rock and opposition movement as a whole. As such, it is a genuine shame that the compositional aspect of The World as It Is Today simply can't stand up to the vocal performance of Kraus. Although well-tuned and obviously extremely thought out and planned ahead of time, Fred Frith and Chris Cutler's multi-instrumentational work and their sort of controlled dissonance, which admittedly is effective in a simplistic manner, simply doesn't do much. The memorability factor of The World as It Is Today almost solely relies on Dagar Kraus as a vocalist, as the instrumentation, while suiting or kind of fitting for the overall style of rock and opposition music, isn't really something that you're going to care about either. I mean, sure, if you are a major fan of progressive sounds, very like proto-brutal prog noises, and generally very, again, experimental progressive kind of sounds, you'll probably enjoy the instrumentation delivered on this record, but unfortunately the vast majority of it doesn't have any appeal beyond that one particular niche, and feels mostly unsuccessful outside of just working for what it is. While this does allow the band's vocalist to be highlighted more than she otherwise would be, it also means that the more instrumental-oriented tracks on The World as It Is Today are really not engaging enough to ever be worth returning to outside of a front-to-back listen. Now, as you maybe would have guessed by the album's title or the fact that it's a genre based around rebellion against one particular kind of machine, The World as It Is Today is a record based around a heavy amount of radical politics-related lyricism. Art Bears aren't nearly as open about it or direct about it as a band like, say, the Dead Kennedys would have been talking about the same exact things, but at the same time, they certainly aren't subtle either. it would be easy to view The World As It Is Today as a sort of wannabe radicality record that's really just basing itself in experimental sounds to overshadow the fact that it has no political or activational legitimacy to it, but at the same exact time, I think that's really just depending on how well you can stomach political ideologies being inserted into your music. Seeing as this entire album is based around one topic, politics, if a person is not a fan of that in any kind of music whatsoever, then it will be very difficult to digest and appreciate what Art Bears are doing here, and understandably so. However, those able to look past a sort of alternative set of politics and political ideas that they may or may not disagree with, then they'll find a band that is genuinely passionate about what they're saying and seemingly genuine in what they're talking about and asking for. The World As It Is Today is executed with such fierce honesty and conviction that any listener who's able to sort of, again, look past that political side of things with a sort of non-biased viewpoint at the record will likely be grabbed even if they don't necessarily agree with the words that are being strung together by Art Bears. They seem genuinely passionate about what they're doing, and as such, that heavily positively affects the music. So overall, The World As It Is Today is a great album that could have been even more brilliant if just a few things were tweaked. For example, the instrumentals aren't nearly as engaging as they could have been, and as such the record suffers from it and becomes a slightly less memorable listening experience in that regard because of it. However, it is my one take on The World As It Is Today that Dagmar Krause's intense vocal work that is extremely underrated and the band's seeming honesty about the politics that they're singing about ultimately results in a record that is very powerful. I would probably only recommend this to people who are pre-established fans of the rock and opposition movement, but then again, the whole RIO scene is very difficult to get into in the first place unless you're already into very experimental music, and experimental music can be difficult to get into if you're not into slightly alternative music, etc., etc. You get my point. So I would really only recommend this if you're deep into just weird music in general or very intense experimental music, but nonetheless, if you are in that sort of realm of listeners, I would say definitely give this one a listen if you haven't already. It's got great vocal work, strong songwriting, and while the instrumentals won't blow you away, and they certainly didn't blow me away, I do think that there is some validity to them as just standard instrumentals that do what they were meant to do, nothing more, nothing less, and I guess really there's nothing wrong with that, which is why I'm going to give this record 4 stars out of 5. There's a lot to like here and very little to dislike, though there are a couple things here or there, which is again why I didn't, give it higher than a 4. I feel like if the instrumentals were better here, I would have given it maybe 4.5 stars out of 5, because this record really had the potential to be a masterpiece even, and by Art Bears' standards, this probably is their magnum opus, if you will, but I don't know, it's a shame that the band didn't do more than they did, because if they kept going on the same upward trajectory that they were by at this point in their career, I think they would have done something absolutely astonishing, but as it stands, The World As It Is Today is not a bad record by any means. In fact, it's a great listen. So again, 4 stars out of 5, and with that being said, that's the end of this review, and I will see you guys in the next one.